remove the wheel, use a 21mm socket. If you have a locking lug nut, you want to take that off before on the ground by hand, and take the other lug nuts off. Remove the wheel. Now we'll take this cotter pin out right here for the tie rod. Just use some pliers or some type of side cutters. So sometimes cotter pins just don't work out the way you want them to. You're just going to have to break off one of the ends. Just like that. And then you can try drilling it out if that works for you. Or sometimes just putting a socket on and zinging it off will work as well. Use a 17mm socket. Take this nut off. Before we pop the tie rod out, we're going to loosen up the jam nut. Use a 7/8 wrench or a 22mm wrench. Loosen that up. You can try to loosen up the tie rod from the knuckle by hammering right on this part of the knuckle. It's just not that safe. You could damage the knuckle, and if you hammer it from underneath there, you could damage the threads. So if you use a tool like this, you won't damage the boot or the threads. And just tighten this up. And it'll just pop like that. Take some locking pliers or a wrench that'll fit on that inner tie rod, and then if you use a 13/16 wrench on this tie rod or a 21, and just loosen up the tie rod. It's a good idea to count the turns when you're doing this, so that when you put it back together, it's close. You're still going to need an alignment afterwards, but it'll be closer. Now take this nut off, use a 21mm socket. Take the locking pliers off. Take this clamp off right here, just use some hose clamp pliers. And there's a clamp on the back side of here. If you take a pick, or you can use some type of screwdriver, and just try to get in there and just spread that clamp out. You're going to be able to loosen it up so you can take the boot off. And most of the time you have to replace this clamp. Sometimes you can reuse them. And then just grab the boot. And slide it off. And slide it off completely. On the back side of the inner tie rod end, there is a lock, and you have to bend that back. So use some type of a chisel and a hammer, and just try to hammer that back a little bit. It doesn't take much, it moves fairly easily. It's fairly thin metal. And then the same underneath. Use a tie rod tool that will fit. This one, a 1 1/4 fits pretty good. Slide the tie rod tool over. And loosen it up. Once it starts spinning, you can take the tool off. Should be able to do it by hand. And slide that off. And that's what that lock looks like right there. It's just bent, thin piece of metal. Now we're going to take this lock, and that's going to go on there. And if you want to add a little thread lock adhesive, that's not going to hurt. Get this started. Now there is tabs for that lock washer, so you want those tabs to be lined up. So you can push that lock washer on a little bit further and then tighten down the tie rod onto the lock washer. And install the tie rod tool again. And you want to use those locking pliers on the inside, again, to hold the rack. And then torque this to 40 foot-pounds, very carefully. And that's it. Now you can fold those locks over to prevent this from loosening up. You can do it on the top and the bottom the same way. just take a punch and a hammer, and it doesn't take much. Just give it a couple taps. You just got to bend it over a little bit. That's good right there. Do the same on the bottom. Just take a little grease and just put it in this location on the inner tie rod, just where the boot's going to sit, or you can put a little on the boot as well. That's good. Now we're going to slide the boot on. If you want to reuse that clamp, if it is okay, you can reuse it, or you can use some wire ties. These wire ties aren't long enough, so I'm just putting them together like this. Just get those kind of close, and we'll trim them afterwards. Just slide this on, and slide the boot on. Now I can tighten up the wire ties. Just snug them up as tight as you can without breaking them. And just use some side cutters. You can tighten them a little tighter with the side cutters and then trim the excess. And put this clamp on. Just line that up. Just like that. Now put the jam nut on. Now install the outer tie rod in and count the threads going on. Put it in the same spot it was when you took it off. And we can move the jam nut closer. Line the knuckle up. Slide that in position. Put the nut on. And use a 19mm ratchet wrench. Tighten this up. Once the stud starts spinning, you can use an Allen to prevent it from spinning. If it does start spinning, this one did not. And torque that to 36 foot-pounds. And you can take a 24mm wrench and tighten up the jam nut. If you can fit a torque wrench on there, torque that to 56 foot-pounds. Put the wheel up. And put the lug nuts on. Now torque the lug nuts to 77 foot-pounds in a cross pattern to tighten the wheel down evenly. Just go around again, double check. After you've done this job, make sure you bring the vehicle to a local shop to have it aligned. You don't want to have premature tire wear.